I was an EMT. This call changed me forever. Working an EMT job is about as easy as you would expect. Late nights, stressful days, never-ending shifts, all the works. I was a paramedic. I started interning at 17, and by 21, I was on payroll. Now, if you're here reading this, then chances are you've probably heard countless paramedic stories before, but I can assure you, this one will take the cake. It started like any other night. A call comes in, my partner and I are dispatched, and we rush to the scene, sirens blaring. We paramedics aren't typically informed of the exact nature of the emergency when calls come in. We're taught to get to the scene as quickly as possible and assess the situation once we arrive, so my partner and I were completely clueless as to what we were walking into. The call led us away from the city's heart and toward its outskirts. We were eventually directed down a dirt road that stretched for about a mile before we reached the homeowner's driveway. It was so narrow and restricted that we actually had to pull over to the side of the road in front of the driveway and proceed on foot, so that's what we did, medical bags in hand. As we made our way up the driveway, we were presented with trash and clothing thrown wildly about the front lawn and porch, and violent screams came from inside the home. My partner and I looked at each other, nervously, before he took a deep breath and knocked on the door. It swung open nearly immediately, and a tall, exhausted-looking man in an unbuttoned shirt with a stained white tank top underneath stood before us. He was pale-faced and looked as though he had been crying. In his right hand, he gripped a Bible so hard that his knuckles glowed white. More violent screams came from behind him as he practically dragged us into the house. Upon entering, the blood was the first thing we noticed. It was all over the floor, and a trail of it led down the hall in the direction that this man was ushering us. It stopped at a locked door. Beyond it, we heard more screaming. Animalistic grunts and growls that made my blood run cold through my veins. Along with the screaming, a faint sound of squelching could be heard, rhythmically. I knocked on the door, and the screaming stopped on a dime. In the midst of all the chaos, I had neglected to ask the man his name or his relation to the person behind the door, and while I awaited a response from whoever was in the room, my partner got his information. It turned out he was this girl's father, and she had apparently gone completely ballistic, seemingly out of nowhere, trashing the house and throwing all of her clothing out in the yard, including the one she was wearing. Her father attempted to intervene, to which she responded by bashing her head into the walls and locking herself in her room with a kitchen knife, all while screaming that demonic scream. While we were receiving this information and attempting to get inside, a scream came again from the room. In the most inhuman voice I have ever heard, a screeching, "Leave me alone," echoed out from beyond the door. This pushed the father over the edge in the midst of his breakdown, and he began throwing himself full force against the bedroom door, kicking as hard as he could. He managed to break the door down before we could restrain him, and what I saw in that bedroom has haunted me for years. This girl lay on the bed, completely nude and expressionless, and stared through my soul as she plunged the kitchen knife into her torso, over and over. Blood soaked the bed, and poured out from dozens of wounds on her body, yet she continued screeching and thrashing like an animal. Without thinking, I shoved past her father and restrained the hand she held the knife with. The animalistic screams grew even more deafening as she fought with more life than should have been in her to get me off of her. It took all of my strength to pry her fingers from the knife handle, and I tossed it to the far corner of the room as soon as I did. With her father wailing and the girl herself gnashing her teeth and snarling, my partner and I restrained her and fought to get her to the ambulance. She stayed on 2 feet and resisted us with the force of a grown man, a stunning contrast to the strength of any other teenage girl. Reaching the back doors of the vehicle, I had to climb up into the patient compartment to retrieve the stretcher, and we strapped her down and started pushing her inside. As we did so, both of her arms shot to the right side of the entrance, and she dug her fingers in so hard that the middle and index fingernails on her left hand snapped off and oozed blood, prompting more screeching. Once we finally got her into the ambulance, her father hopped in the back with me, and we made our way back to the hospital. Looking her over, her wounds were absolutely detrimental. Her insides looked as though they had been turned to mush, and the fact that she was still alive was an absolute miracle. The screeching stopped, though, and her vitals began to fall dramatically. Her previously wired and bloodshot eyes began to flutter and shut, and by the time we reached the hospital, she had flatlined and was announced dead on arrival. The father was an absolute mess, and I don't blame him. Partly because of the sheer scope of everything, but also because I remember her last words. The words she spoke looking into her father's eyes, as the life left hers. "How did we get here?"